There's a saying that if you want a job doing, ask a busy man. Well, David Ashford seems to be the man to ask, as he's taking the Safeguarding Amendment Bill 2025 through Keys, is taking 4 pieces of legislation through Tynwald relating to the Human Tissue and Organ Donation Act 2021. He's got the Cabinet Office Department plan to move, as well as the Council of Ministers update report on inward migration. So what does all that mean in relation to our lives? Is government delivering its ambition to increase migration to the island? David Ashford joins me now in the studio to tell us all. You've got several items on the Tynwald order paper, but perhaps if we start off by looking at the Safeguarding Amendment Bill 2025. That's, I think it got first reading in the last sitting of Keys.
That's correct.
And what does the bill do?
So it's a really simple bill, if there is such a thing as a simple bill. But what it does is it brings amendments to the Safeguarding Act. It actually addresses one of the concerns that, funnily enough, I raised at the time when the Safeguarding Act was originally going through, which was the fact that the board membership was actually written into the primary legislation. Now, obviously, once something's written in primary legislation, it's very hard to change, and we have had changes since then. Manx Care now exists, which it didn't at the time of the Safeguarding Act. So while they currently sit on the board, they actually aren't a full member of the board, which is something that really does need correcting. So one of the things it does is it moves the membership out of the board out of the primary legislation and says that it can be changed by secondary legislation, which I think is a much more sensible and fairer way of doing things. There's also been concerns expressed in the past around sharing of information, and with GDPR, people not really understanding when they can and can't share information, and in some cases having a reluctance to do so because they're worried about the ramifications. So what the bill does is it makes it absolutely clear that if someone is sharing it to ensure the safety and safeguarding of that person, they are legally protected in terms of sharing that information. There wouldn't be any comeback. And the third...
In fact, it seems to encourage that, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, and that's what we should be doing. It was something I said back when I was Minister for Health and Social Care, that it's absolutely essential that people feel able in the different services to share information with one another to make sure that people don't fall between the cracks. And the third and other crucial part of the bill is around the independent chair. While the Safeguarding Board has an independent chair, it's not actually written into the legislation that it's independent chair, it actually states chair. So what we actually are going to do is make sure that all the references state very clearly that the person who's in that chair is an independent chair. It's not someone who's part of the different organisations, someone who's part of government or part of the departments. It's got to be someone independent.
And that perhaps wasn't as clear as it might have been, certainly the way I read that. So effectively what you're saying is it is ensuring that the person has to be an independent chair.
Yes, so
not that they have to, rather than being called the chair in the future, they're called the independent chair. It is making sure that whoever chairs the Safeguarding Board cannot be a member of a department that could be affected by decisions.
Exactly. The chair is not an interested party within government or the departments or the wider organisations that feed into the Safeguarding Board. It's about ensuring that independence and transparency. So while it has always been the case in practice since the Safeguarding Board was set up, I think it's important that it's actually stipulated in the legislation, and this Amendment Act will actually, or bill as it is at the moment until it goes through the branches, will actually ensure that happens.
And the membership of the board, I mean, it's possibly, well, I suppose on the one hand, it's, you know, if something's in primary legislation, that means it's really important that it's there. So on the one hand, I suppose the fact that the membership of the board is in primary legislation indicated that it was really important to whoever introduced the legislation that it was clear who could and couldn't be part of the board. But on the other hand, it's quite a significant hurdle to overcome if you want to add to the board.
It is, and I mean that's why we're keeping it in legislation. We're just moving it to secondary legislation, so it's much easier to change. So just to be absolutely clear, there is no intention to remove the membership from legislation. We're just changing the legislative vehicle that's done by, because like I say, things change, and a prime example of that is Manx Care, and the fact that since the Safeguarding Act came through, Manx Care has come about, and yet the members of Manx Care that sit on that board sit there effectively as co-opted members. They don't have any formal voting rights or anything like that, which is a bit crazy when you actually consider they are the organisation delivering many of these services that fall under the Safeguarding Act.
Safeguarding seems to have become it's obviously until the legislation was introduced, it wasn't a thing to anywhere near the extent that it is now, but it really does seem to have become a vital part of everything that government is involved with when it comes to looking after people.
I think it always was a vital part, but what the Safeguarding Act did was it made clear people's obligations and clear the process that should be followed, and crucially, of course, establish the Safeguarding Board to actually be able to look at cases, report and learn and do practice, rather than things being done in a piecemeal manner across government and other organisations. So it puts specific duties into law, and I think that was quite important at the time. It was actually quite an important act, and it remains so. But like I say, this amendment bill is looking just to correct three things that, to be honest, with practice now that the Act's been in, we decide need to actually change.
And the important thing as well to note is that all the members of the board, the current members of the board, are supportive of these changes.
They are. The board is supportive. Like I say, it's not massive changes to the Act. They are three very principal ones, and they're ones that have been fed back to us by the various teams as well, particularly around the GDPR. And, it's ensuring people feel comfortable and don't constantly worry that if they share information, there's something that's going to come back on them, when the purpose of them sharing that information is to help the individual.
So then we can move on to Tynwald, and you've got quite a lot of action. Mind you, everybody seems to have a lot of Tynwald action this week, it is this week, isn't it? And the bit that you've got, one of the bits that you have to do is Human Tissue and Organ Donation Act related, and there are various guides associated with that are being introduced. I presume this is because the Act is a 2021 Act, and this is now effectively the various bits of documents that you're taking through Tynwald are bringing the Act into force, making sure that the right guidelines are in place, and that the Act can now be substantially used.
So this is the really technical codes. So this is as technical as you get, really, when it comes to legislative terms. This obviously comes off the back, as you rightly say, Phil, about the 2021 Act that came through around particularly organ donation, where we are flipping the system from people opting in to people opting out instead. There's been a very strong community campaign in relation to this, and I thank all the campaigners that have pushed for this for a long time. They will be absolutely delighted, I think, to actually see this finally cross its final hurdle, hopefully, in Tynwald, should Tynwald support it. There are 8 codes in total, and there's 4 pieces of secondary legislation that I need to take through the branch in order for us to bring it in, because it is important we have those codes in place to ensure how human tissue is handled, how organs are handled, how any form of transplants and the system for the opt-out is actually handled as well.
The one thing I did think as I was reading, I will confess that I haven't read every single line of every single code. The first code runs to 42 pages. It is fair to say that it is not written in plain English. It takes a bit of reading to actually understand what the code says. So I guess the code is primarily designed for practitioners rather than the layperson.
It is. It's one of those pieces of the codes, particularly the 8 codes. They are basically the way I describe it, the technical manual. So the 8 codes are basically aimed at the practitioners. The people who will actually be doing these procedures will be handling human tissue, will be handling organs, and how that process has to work. So yes, if anyone wants to go and read them, they will certainly find they're not aimed at the man in the street. There is a lot of technical detail in there, and very detailed legislative work as well. So there's been an awful lot of work that's had to go into this, and I thank all those who have participated in pulling the codes and the legislation together, because it has been a very lengthy process, and anyone who goes and reads them will actually see that. But yeah, they are very, very much at the practitioners. It's the 4 orders I will be taking through that are the more, should we say, more layman orientated pieces of legislation.
And the Act itself, was this the one, the private members' bill that Martin Perkins?
It was indeed. Yeah. It was brought through by my former colleague Martin Perkins, and again I want to praise Martin for the way he handled this, the way he took the legislation through, and in a very calm manner. Martin did an excellent job in getting this onto the statute books, and now he'll be able to see it come to fruition if Tynwald approves these, whichever day we reach them.
And of course, the principle is that, as you say, rather than choosing to donate your organs, you have to choose not to donate your organs, assuming your organs are donatable at some point after you've passed away. It's been talked about for quite a few years, but finally, Tynwald has looks anyway as though it's about to implement this.
It does. I mean, the UK has had very similar equivalent legislation since their Human Tissue Act back in 2004. So sort of, you could say 21 years on, we're now actually moving in step with this. There's been a lot of work that's gone on, and it is a flipping of the system. We've done a lot of publicity around it as well. We deliberately haven't rushed this legislation. We've taken it a piece at the time before bringing it forward, and we will also be doing another public awareness campaign once Tynwald approval, if it is received at this sitting and everything comes into place, is done.
So then we move on to item 7 on the Tynwald order paper, and that is the Council of Ministers update report on inward migration. And the report was due to be back to Tynwald in June, but it didn't quite make it. When we look at what the motion says, it doesn't actually seem to require an awful lot. Tynwald receives the report and approves the following inward migration policy recommendations. The recommendations are pretty much motherhood and apple pie type things. There's nothing controversial here that people are being asked to approve.
Well, no, it's tweaks to the immigration system. Part of the economic strategy is obviously around needing to fill those vacancies across the economy. We know we actually need to attract more workers to meet economic needs, particularly young families and young workers, while at the same time supporting upskilling of Isle of Man-based workers as well, and helping more residents into work. But we know that the number of people unemployed on the island and the number of vacancies within our economy are completely two different ends of the scale. We have 0.7% unemployment, but then we've got roughly around about 1,000 vacancies across our economy. So the two don't match up. So we need to actually be able to bring economically active people into the island to fill those vacancies. But obviously it is important that is where our targeting is, and that is what these will do. It will target our visa routes to be looking at young families to be able to come contribute to our island, and basically that will benefit all of us on this island.
And to a certain extent, the governments have been pushed into a bit of a mini crisis. Certainly in the UK, it is the case that there's a clear and popular mood to stamp down on illegal immigration, and yet in the desire and the mad rush from all the main political parties to do that, they then discover that they struggle to fill all the opportunities that exist, the employment opportunities. I guess it's similar in the Isle of Man, because a lot of the lower paid type jobs are jobs that it was always difficult to get Manx workers to actually fill.
Well, I think there's several points in that, which is in the political conversation, and particularly in the UK sphere, it's very easy to muddle the two up between illegal immigration and inward migration. What we are referring to is inward migration, so people who are coming to this island perfectly legally, coming on visa routes where they have gone through the full assessment, they've applied for the visa, and they are coming to fill an opportunity in the economy. To come and actually contribute to the island, to become part of our community, and actually bring potentially, their families here as well to contribute to the community. It's about that. Illegal immigration is something completely different, where the UK has had issues, should we say, under whatever type of government they have had, and it is an ongoing debate. They are two very, very different topics, and what we are focused on is ensuring we get people into the island who can benefit the economy and benefit our society as a whole.
And I'm sure they are different topics, but of course the fact that there is a focus on the issue of reducing the number of immigrants coming into the UK does make it more difficult for Isle of Man government, because inevitably the measures are being taken place to reduce the number of people that end up in the UK, and of course our immigration policy is governed largely by what the UK does. So if there are fewer available people, then it becomes more difficult, I guess, for the Isle of Man government to attract people.
Well, we do have certain leeway as a Crown dependency to be able to focus our visa routes on what we believe is necessary for the island, and we do use that to actually be able to ensure that we are getting adequate supplies of people to be able to meet our demands. So, for instance, in the health and social care sector and other sectors across the island. So there is some latitude, obviously, on the big things around nationality, right to remain. We do mirror the UK, because otherwise we would have a different system for people being able to come into the island, then go into the UK and vice versa. So we do tend to mirror the UK on the big things, but we do, in terms of visa routes and people coming in for economic purposes, have some latitude to be able to target particular sectors that are important for the island.
Has your government been successful in the course of the last 4 years in attracting people to come to the island?
Well, it's interesting, because despite the fact that we actually have effectively a negative result in terms of births compared to deaths, so there are more deaths in the island than there are births, we are still seeing the population numbers tick up. So that shows that we are attracting people. But what we also now have is more of a breakdown of who is actually coming into the island. And one of the interesting things that actually reveals is that new residents coming in have tended to be younger than they have in previous iterations of governments. So, for instance, during this administration, new residents now, whether we're seeing, tend to be in the age range of between 30 and 44. And that, of course, is crucial for growing the working age population, and also potentially the income from public finances that pay for all the services that we depend on. So we are actually already seeing that trend. What we need to do with the policy is ensure that targeting continues, and that we are looking at the specific sectors that we actually need to grow as an economy and the vacancies that we need to fill.
I think government was looking it quickly seemed to row back from the idea, but initially there was talk of 100,000 population, and this was the answer, and then perhaps it was recognised that having a population target wasn't necessarily the answer. It was the number of economically active people that was more important. But assuming that 100,000, an extra 10,000 people, more than 10,000 people over the lifetime of our island plan, you were looking for in the region of 1,000 people a year to come to the island. The figures wouldn't suggest that you're anywhere near that at the moment.
No, they wouldn't at the moment. But again, you mentioned about the 100,000 and rowing back. If I remember rightly, and I was a backbencher at the time, I seem to remember that figure came about due to an answer in a Tynwald question and a statement. If you actually refer to the documents which is driving this, like the economic strategy, the reference is around economic growth rather than actually a physical number. Which is something, as I said, as a backbencher, I've always more supported, because you could actually aim for 100,000 population, but if you're getting 50, say 10,000 in economically active people, and 5,000 economically active, that's not as good as, say, ending up with 5,000 people who are all economically active. So I think the number is a bit of a red herring. It's about what it does to actually benefit the economy and drive forward the wealth and well-being of this island.
And of course, in the 1990s, 2000s, numbers in the region of 600 coming into the island were quite normal. But the numbers now, maybe the last 4 years, where are we?
But they were. But look at the demographics. A lot of the people, and I think one of the worst things that actually happened in those early days was the advertising campaign that effectively, several of them were saying, come to the Isle of Man, it's a great place to retire to. Now, so what you're doing immediately is you're advertising for people to come in who are not economically active, who aren't necessarily going to contribute a lot into the system. And I think, while it was well-intentioned at that time, and yes, we did see quite a number coming in, it didn't have the effect that people thought it would. In fact, if anything, it put a bit of a strain on some areas of the system. So the difference this time is, like I say, we can get fascinated about numbers. It's about the economic benefit and what it actually provides rather than the physical number.
And I guess I'm fascinated by the numbers because your government put them out there. And if you're not giving me a clear answer on
no,
numbers,
I'll happily give you a clear answer.
It would appear
Phil.
that perhaps
No, I'll happily give you a clear answer.
Okay.
The net growth is roughly around about, at the moment, if you average it out, about 150, 200 a year coming into the island. But like I say, the interesting thing from those stats that we've actually now got with the breakdown of age is it is a much younger demographic that we're actually seeing coming in, so the 30 to 44 age range predominantly, and that is a big change because, again, it goes back to what I said about the 100,000 figure. You can have a figure of 600 a year coming into the island, but if 500 of them are over pensionable age, that's not as good as having a cohort of, say, 200 coming in each year that is actually within the economically active contributing age groups.
But 200 is around about a fifth of what your target was.
Well, it's lower than we obviously want, and we will build up to that. But we are still seeing an increase in the population. We are seeing more economically active people coming in compared to what we have previously, and we are starting to attract the right age group as well.
And then finally, I think we've got enough time to cover this. The departmental plan. Certainly my fear, having been engaged with departmental plans when I was in Council of Ministers some years ago, and then deciding that actually this was an awful lot of activity with very little by way of meaningful outcome, the whole thing was quietly dropped. It's been reinvigorated in this administration. Is the department plan a useful way of departments, I suppose, crystallising their message and getting it out there so that everyone understands what it's about, or is it just a way in which already hard-pressed senior officers can become even more hard-pressed and stressed?
Well, I can speak from two viewpoints here, because over the life of this administration I've spent 2 years in ministerial office and I've spent 2 years as a backbencher, so I've seen it from both sides, and my answer from both sides is I think it does work. From the ministerial side, it focuses the department. It actually gives focus to what you're wanting to deliver, and it boils it down to actual key deliverables. If you look at what we've done with the Cabinet Office plan for this one that's going to be debated at Tynwald, you'll see a radical change in style to the department plans that have gone before, in the fact that we have smart objectives and physical KPI outcomes as well, so they are fully measurable the whole way through. But equally, from a backbencher's point of view, which I've also seen the department plans in, is it is a chance to hold departments' feet to the fire, to actually say, where are you intending to go, what is your direction of travel, what are you wanting to deliver, and crucially, how are you going to deliver it, and what timescales. And if they don't deliver, it's there in black and white. So there is the ability for Tynwald, I think, via the department plans, to track more around what government's doing and actually be able to scrutinise government much more. In terms of hard-pressed civil service, there is work that goes on with it. We've had an incredible team in Cabinet Office, across the whole of Cabinet Office, working on this plan. There's been some really dedicated officers, no doubt, burning the midlife oil to get it to the stage that it's in now, be able to go before Tynwald. But I don't think that's been at the expense of other work. I've not seen anything either as a minister or backbencher that suggests something has fallen over or something hasn't happened because everyone's rushing around too busy writing department plans. What department plans do is they tend to actually focus and actually provide information on stuff that departments are doing anyway, the stuff the department has already decided to do. So it's just articulating that in written form rather than people sat there having to formulate brand new policy to fill an island, to fill a department plan or the island plan. It's actually people just articulating what the department's direction of travel is. So it's not having to create a whole new stack of work purely just to create a department plan.
That was Douglas North MHK and Cabinet Office Minister David Ashford. So what do you think? Have you ever read any of these department plans? Do they help keep government on track to deliver departmental promises? Or do they result in officers focusing their time in creating reports and ticking boxes in plans rather than delivering the change we all need? Judging by the pace of change, it seems more the latter. I'm Phil Gaughan. Go to Mayo. Thanks for listening.